The night air was thick with tension as Adrian's words sliced through the silence of our living room. "I regret marrying an older woman," he spat out, his eyes devoid of the warmth I once knew. His words stung, a stark reminder of how far we drifted apart. "My name is Alara, a 36-year-old woman working for an international corporation. Life with Adrian, my husband, 3 years my junior, started as a harmonious melody. He was a charismatic leader, the kind who naturally commanded attention. I never minded his dominance. In fact, it brought a sense of balance to our relationship. Our routine was simple. I managed the household chores while Adrian took charge of our outdoor activities. It was a dynamic that worked, until the day my father fell seriously ill. I still remember the frantic call from my mother, her voice trembling, telling me about my father's worsening condition. I rushed to the hospital, only to find that I was too late. The grief was overwhelming, a void that seemed to consume everything, including my marriage. Adrian's lack of empathy during that time was the first crack in our once solid foundation. He didn't come to the hospital, citing urgent work commitments. I tried to understand, to justify his absence, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. As I navigated through the pain of losing my father, Adrian's support was conspicuously absent. His true colors began to show, his once endearing confidence turning into unbearable arrogance. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams, now echoed with arguments and bitter words. "Alara, can't you see I'm under a lot of pressure at work?" Adrian would often say, dismissing my attempts to discuss our strained relationship. I tried to hold on, believing that this was just a phase, a hurdle we could overcome. But the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me through thick and thin, was slowly fading away, replaced by a stranger who wore his face. Tonight was different, though. Tonight his words were like a cold, sharp blade, cutting through any pretense of affection or respect. His disdain was clear, his regret for our marriage palpable. "You're older, Alara. You should be grateful that someone like me chose to marry you," Adrian sneered, his voice laced with contempt. The words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The realization dawned on me, harsh and unyielding. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, saw me as nothing more than a convenience, a mistake he regretted. I stood there silent, the weight of his words crushing me. But amidst the pain, a spark of something else flickered, anger, defiance, perhaps even a hint of liberation. I was more than the sum of my years, more than Adrian's condescending view of me. The night ended with Adrian storming off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. But as I sat there, a plan began to form, a path to reclaiming my life from the shadows of a love that had turned into something unrecognizable. The next morning dawned with a sense of purpose. As I prepared for the day, the resolve in my heart grew stronger. It was time to take a stand, to show Adrian that I was not the weak, older woman he thought he could belittle and discard. The stage was set, and I was ready to turn the tables. It was time for Adrian to see the true strength of the woman he had underestimated. The days following our heated argument felt like walking through a dense fog. Adrian's presence in our home turned into a constant reminder of the deepening chasm between us. His dismissive attitude, once an occasional irritation, had now become a daily occurrence. It was a Thursday evening when things escalated. I had just returned from a grueling day at work, hoping for a quiet night, but the moment I stepped in, I knew peace was a luxury I wouldn't have. "Alara, you're late again." Adrian's voice was cold, devoid of concern. "I had to attend a dinner alone because you couldn't make time." "I had an important meeting, Adrian. I told you this morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's your excuse for everything, isn't it?" "Your work, always your work," he retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. "What do you want me to do, Adrian? Quit my job to cater to your every whim?" His laugh was bitter. "Oh, please, you and your high-flying job. You think you're so important, don't you?" The conversation spiraled from there, each word a sharpened barb aimed to wound. Adrian's ability to twist my words left me reeling. His accusations were baseless, yet delivered with a conviction that made me question my own sanity. "Maybe I was wrong about you, Alara. Maybe you're not the woman I thought I married," he sneered. I couldn't help but laugh, a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. And who did you think you married, Adrian? A submissive wife who would bow to your every demand? He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Maybe I should have. At least she would have appreciated what I do for her. The audacity of his words left me speechless. The man I once saw as my partner, my equal, now stood before me as someone unrecognizable, someone who viewed our marriage as a transaction. As the night wore on, the realization sank in. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a fundamental mismatch of values and respect. The man I married, who once looked at me with love, now gazed at me with disdain and entitlement. I lay awake that night, the echoes of our argument replaying in my mind. The more I thought, the clearer it became. I couldn't continue living this way. I needed to break free from the oppressive atmosphere that our home had become. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. It was time to start planning my escape from this toxic marriage. I needed to gather my strength, my resources, and most importantly, my dignity. As I left for work, I glanced back at the house, a place that once symbolized love and companionship. Now it stood as a monument to my misplaced trust and a relationship that had soured beyond repair. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my freedom. Adrian's reign of emotional tyranny was about to come to an end, and I was determined to emerge victorious. The tension in our house was like a thick fog, suffocating and relentless. Adrian's disdain had become more overt, his words more cutting. But it was on the eve of my father's first death anniversary that everything reached a boiling point. "I can't believe you expect me to attend this morbid gathering," Adrian said disdainfully as I prepared for the next day. "It's important to me, Adrian. It's about honoring my father's memory," I replied, my voice laced with a plea for understanding. "Your father, not mine. Why should I have to waste my time?" He scoffed, rolling his eyes. I felt a wave of anger surge through me. "It's not a waste of time to support your wife during a time of grief," Adrian snorted. "Oh, please. It's been a year, Alara. You need to move on. Besides, I have more important things to do." His words stung like a slap. "More important than your wife's feelings?" I shot back, my voice rising. He smirked. "Exactly. I'm glad you're finally understanding where your little family drama stands in the grand scheme of things." That was it, the final straw. My patience, worn thin by months of neglect and disrespect, finally shattered. "You're unbelievable, Adrian. You're selfish, heartless." He leaned in, his eyes cold. "That's rich coming from you, Alara. Always so wrapped up in your work, in your own world." I couldn't contain my fury. "At least I care about others, unlike you." Adrian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Care? Is that what you call it? It's no wonder your father was always so disappointed in you." That lie, that unfounded accusation about my beloved father, was more than I could bear. "Get out," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. "What?" Adrian's smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise. "Get out of this house! I can't stand to look at you anymore!" I shouted, the words erupting from deep within me. For a moment, Adrian looked taken aback, but then his expression hardened. "Fine, if that's what you want. But remember, Alara, you're the one who's going to end up alone." With those parting words, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, shaking, a mix of anger, relief, and profound sadness washing over me. The house was eerily silent, the void left by Adrian's absence, both a balm and a reminder of what our marriage had become. I sank onto the couch, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. One thing was clear: I couldn't let Adrian get away with his behavior. It was time for him to learn that his actions had consequences. As I sat there, a plan began to form in my mind. I would not only leave Adrian, but I would also make sure he regretted the way he treated me. He thought he could demean me, abandon me in my time of need, and face no repercussions? He was sorely mistaken. I would start by securing my finances, ensuring I was in a strong position to leave. Then I would gather evidence of Adrian's emotional abuse, his neglect, and his infidelity, if my suspicions were correct. He wouldn't see it coming. He was too arrogant to ever imagine I could be a threat. But I was more than he bargained for. I was Alara, and I was done being the victim. It was time for Adrian to pay for his cruelty, and I was just the person to ensure he did. The morning of my father's death anniversary dawned, a somber reminder of the loss that still echoed in my heart. Adrian had not returned since our explosive argument, and his absence on this significant day only deepened the wound. As I dressed in black, preparing to honor my father's memory, my phone buzzed. It was Adrian, his name on the screen reigniting a flicker of anger. I answered, bracing myself. Alara, I've decided I won't be attending the memorial today. Adrian's voice was casual, almost indifferent. You decided? It's my father's anniversary, Adrian. I couldn't keep the hurt out of my voice. Yeah, well, I have a golf game with some clients. It's important for my career, he replied nonchalantly. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Your career? Is that all you ever think about? What's that supposed to mean? You're one to talk about obsession with work, he retorted. This isn't about work, Adrian. This is about being there for your wife when she needs you, I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. Adrian sighed audibly. Look, Alara, we both know you're capable of handling this on your own. You always do. That's not the point, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of frustration. Whatever, Alara, I don't have time for this. I need to get ready, he said, dismissive as ever. The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in silence, the weight of his absence heavier than ever. It was in that moment, surrounded by the cold walls of our home, that I realized Adrian would never change. He was a man consumed by his own needs, incapable of empathy or support. As I made my way to the memorial service, memories of my father flooded my mind. He had always been my pillar of strength, a guiding light through my darkest days. Now, in his absence, I found myself facing one of my greatest challenges alone. Throughout the service, I put on a brave face, but inside I was seething with a mix of grief and anger. Adrian's blatant disregard for my feelings was a betrayal I couldn't forgive. He had promised to be my partner, to stand by me in good times and bad, yet here I was, mourning alone, while he played golf. The ride home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Adrian had pushed me too far, and it was time he faced the consequences of his selfishness. I began to lay the groundwork for my plan. First, I would secure my financial independence, ensuring I had the resources to leave Adrian for good. Then, I would gather evidence of his neglect and emotional abuse, building a case that would leave him with nothing. As I walked through the door of our now loveless home, I felt a newfound sense of determination. Adrian had underestimated me, mistaking my patience for weakness, but he was about to learn just how strong Alara could be. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by his rules. It was time for Adrian to face the music, and I would be the one conducting the orchestra. The days following the memorial were a blur of silent preparation and cold determination. I was like a chess player, meticulously planning each move. My first step was to secure my financial independence, a task I approached with a newfound sense of urgency. It was during this time that I made a discovery that would escalate my plans. I found divorce papers on Adrian's desk, already signed. His boldness in preparing for a divorce without even a discussion was a clear message of his disregard for our marriage. Staring at the papers, a mixture of shock and relief washed over me. This was the point of no return. I called Adrian, needing to confront him about this final betrayal. Adrian, I found the divorce papers. Is this how you tell me it's over? My voice was steady, masking the turmoil inside. His laughter chilled me. Oh, you found them? Saves me the trouble of bringing it up. I thought it's what you wanted, given how things have been. His casual dismissal of our marriage ignited a fire within me. You think you can just discard me like this after everything? It's not about discarding, Alara. It's about moving on. I need someone who supports my career, not someone who's always competing with me, he replied, his tone laced with arrogance. The irony of his words was almost laughable. Support your career? What about my career, Adrian? What about supporting me? Adrian scoffed. Your career. Please, Alara, it's always been about you and your achievements. I'm tired of being in your shadow. His words stung, but I refused to let him see my pain. You're delusional, Adrian. You've always been the one in the spotlight. I was just the one behind you, cleaning up your messes. There was a pause, and then Adrian's voice turned cold. Well, Alara, if you're not happy with the divorce, feel free to contest it. But I'm done here. I need a fresh start, with someone who appreciates me. The call ended, leaving me standing in a room filled with memories of a love that had turned sour. But amidst the heartache, there was a sense of liberation. Adrian had shown his true colors, and now it was time for me to paint a new picture of my life. one where he had no place. I would take the divorce papers to the family court, but not before ensuring I had everything in place to leave Adrian with nothing but his arrogance. He thought he could control me, break me down, but he was about to learn that Alara was not a woman to be underestimated. The revenge I planned was not just for me, but for every moment of neglect, every insult, every time he made me feel unworthy. Adrian would regret the day he underestimated the strength of the woman he married. As I set my plan into motion, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I was no longer the passive wife, bending to Adrian's will. I was a force to be reckoned with, and my storm was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I meticulously gathered evidence of Adrian's neglect and emotional abuse, documenting each instance with precision. It was a grim task, but necessary for the battle ahead. As I prepared for my next move, fate intervened in an unexpected way. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Adrian's career was faltering. His overconfidence had led to several critical mistakes at work, and his reputation was suffering. This news, though not surprising, gave me an added edge. Adrian's world was starting to crumble, and I was ready to give it the final push. Then came the day of reckoning. I confronted Adrian one last time, armed with the evidence I had gathered and a steely resolve. "Adrian, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm as he walked through the door. He glanced at me, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What now, Alara? I'm tired and not in the mood for another one of your lectures." "It's not a lecture. It's about the divorce," I replied, holding up the papers. He smirked. "Finally ready to sign them? Decided to give up?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "No, Adrian, I'm not giving up. I'm fighting back." Confusion replaced his smug expression. "What are you talking about?" "I've gathered evidence, Adrian, evidence of all the times you neglected me, emotionally abused me. I've documented everything, and I know about your failing career." Adrian's face turned pale, his facade cracking. "You wouldn't dare. You think anyone will believe you?" "They will when they see the evidence. And let's not forget your tarnished reputation at work. How do you think that will play out in court?" I countered. For the first time I saw fear in Adrian's eyes. He had underestimated me, thinking I would quietly retreat. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could control. "Alara, you can't do this to me. I'll lose everything," he stammered, the arrogance gone from his voice. "That's the point, Adrian. You took me for granted, treated me like I was nothing. Now, you'll see what it's like to have nothing," I said, the words tasting of sweet revenge. Adrian's defeat was evident in his slumped shoulders and defeated gaze. He had lost not just the battle, but the war. As I watched him leave, a sense of triumph mixed with sadness washed over me. This was not the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I was left with. Adrian had forced my hand, and I had played it to the best of my ability. The days that followed were filled with legal proceedings and negotiations. But with my evidence and Adrian's crumbling professional life, the advantage was mine. The divorce was finalized in my favor, leaving me with a sense of closure and a fresh start. Adrian, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. His career continued its downward spiral, and he was left with little to his name. It was a harsh outcome, but one he had brought upon himself. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to the future with a sense of hope. I had emerged from the ashes of a broken marriage stronger and more determined. Adrian's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for my transformation. I was no longer the woman he had tried to break. I was Alara, reborn and ready to take on the world. In the aftermath of the divorce, my life took on a new rhythm, one that was entirely my own. The shadow of Adrian's presence had dissipated, leaving me with a newfound sense of freedom. I embraced this change, allowing it to reshape my world. It was during this period of transformation that an opportunity arose, an offer to work at our company's overseas headquarters. It was the kind of opportunity I had dreamed of, but had previously set aside for the sake of my marriage. Now nothing held me back. As I prepared for this new chapter, Adrian reached out, his voice a mixture of desperation and false contrition. "Alara, can we talk? I've been thinking maybe we rushed into this divorce." I couldn't help but feel a bitter satisfaction at his words. "Rushed, Adrian? After everything you've done? After everything you said?" He hesitated, then continued. I know I made mistakes, but we can start over. I've changed. The claim was laughable. Changed? Adrian, you only reach out now because you've seen the consequences of your actions. You haven't changed. You're just scared of being alone. His voice cracked, a sign of his crumbling facade. Alara, please? I need you. I've lost my job, my reputation. I have nothing. The irony of his plea was not lost on me. You need me, or do you need someone to fall back on? I'm not your safety net, Adrian. I'm moving on to a better life, a life I put on hold for you. There was silence on the other end, and then a defeated sigh. So this is really it, then? Yes, Adrian. This is it. Goodbye. I ended the call, a final full stop to our conversation and to our relationship. As I boarded the plane to my new destination, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey I had undertaken. From a woman who had loved and trusted to one betrayed and belittled, and now to a woman reborn with strength and independence. The flight was long, but it gave me time to contemplate. I thought about my father, how he had always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. In a way, this move was a tribute to him, a realization of the aspirations he had always supported. Upon arrival, the new environment was a breath of fresh air. The culture, the people, the work, it was all invigorating. I threw myself into my new role with a passion I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues were welcoming, and I quickly established myself as a valuable member of the team. News from back home trickled in. Adrian's life continued its downward spiral, a path he had chosen through his actions. There was no joy in his misfortune, only a stark reminder of the consequences of selfishness and arrogance. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace that had been missing for years. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer painful. They were reminders of what I had overcome, symbols of my resilience. I occasionally thought of Adrian, wondering if he ever realized the full extent of his mistakes. But those thoughts were fleeting, mere echoes of a past life. My days were filled with new challenges and adventures. I explored my new city, made new friends, and even began to dabble in hobbies I had long neglected. Life was vibrant, full of possibilities. As I looked out at the city skyline one evening, a sense of contentment washed over me. I had faced adversity, fought for my dignity, and emerged victorious. I was Alara, no longer defined by the shadows of a failed marriage, but by the bright promise of a future I had reclaimed. This was not just a new chapter, it was a whole new book. And I was the author, ready to write a story of success, happiness, and true fulfillment.
Hello, I'm Denise, and I'm currently 35 years old. When I was just 8, I lost my mother, which led to my father raising me on his own. This went on for about 10 years until I was around 13. That's when my dad shared with me that he had started dating someone. At that age, I didn't really have strong feelings about it. However, when I was 14, my dad introduced me to his girlfriend Margaret and mentioned they were planning to marry. Margaret was significantly younger than I expected, being only a decade older than me. Initially, this age difference startled me a bit, but with time, it became less of an issue for me. Margaret and I didn't exactly click. She often tried too hard to act like a mother to me, which felt overwhelming. Despite my attempts to discuss this with my dad, he seemed to take Margaret's side. This didn't sit well with me, and my relationship with my dad remained strong. We would meet for lunch every other weekend. My dad sometimes tried to encourage a relationship between Margaret and me, but eventually he seemed to accept my feelings. Professionally, I was doing quite well. Straight after college, I landed a job at a reputable firm. Financially, I was neither wealthy nor struggling, living a comfortable life and managing to save. However, my world was shaken when I was 30 as my dad tragically passed away in an accident. Losing him was an enormous blow, leaving me to navigate profound grief. I struggled immensely, often crying myself to sleep and finding it hard to get through the day. Fortunately, I was able to take a week off work to grieve. Despite our strained relationship, I knew Margaret and my dad had shared a deep love, so I tried to check on her. The first time I saw her after the accident, She appeared surprisingly unaffected, at least outwardly. I, on the other hand, was visibly distressed with puffy, dark circles eyes and a blotchy complexion from constant crying. It struck me how different our grieving processes appeared to be. Though I recognized it might seem judgmental to expect her to grieve in the same way, in the beginning, I secretly wished I wasn't the only one feeling such a profound sense of loss over my dad, who meant everything to me. This feeling slowly dissipated when Margaret and I had a heart-to-heart, as she tearfully reminisced about the wonderful person my dad was and how his absence left a void in our lives. It became clear to me that she too was grappling with grief. Following this conversation, I found myself visiting Margaret more frequently. Our meetings over tea became a space where we could openly share our emotions. It was refreshing to interact with her as herself, rather than in the role she had tried to fill as a mother figure. One day during one of our talks, Margaret began sobbing uncontrollably. It caught me off guard because our discussion hadn't touched on anything particularly sad. I quickly moved to comfort her, letting her lean on me. Once she had settled a little, I gently inquired about what had upset her so much. Through her tears, she explained that she had received a worrying letter from the bank. She had been so engrossed in caring for my dad and handling his medical bills in the preceding months that she'd neglected the mortgage payments. Now, with the mortgage in her name and no job to her credit, she was facing the threat of homelessness. The bank had given her a 5-month deadline to clear her dues, including the mortgage payments for those months. She was in a financial bind, with not enough money to meet the bank's demands, and my dad hadn't left her with sufficient funds to tide over such a crisis. Trying to soothe her, I reassured Margaret that it wasn't the end of the world, and that I was in a position to help her out. Surprised and grateful, she listened as I proposed my conditions for the assistance. First, I explained that it wasn't feasible for me to both rent my place and cover her mortgage, so I would need to move in with her. She immediately agreed, affirming that the house was as much mine as hers. Secondly, I made it clear that this arrangement couldn't be permanent. I would help with the mortgage for now, but she needed to find employment soon to take over its payments. I was willing to contribute to half of the mortgage to ease the transition. Margaret agreed to these terms, deeply thankful for the support. Through this ordeal, we found a new understanding and appreciation for each other, brought together by our mutual love for my dad and our shared commitment to honoring his memory. However, I emphasized that Margaret would need to secure employment and over time reimburse me for the financial help I was offering. She assured me she would. Understanding the immense transition from financial security to uncertainty evoked my empathy towards her. The anxiety and stress she must have been feeling were unimaginable. But thankfully, I was in a position to assist. Thanks to a principle my dad instilled in me: the importance of maintaining a robust savings account for unforeseen challenges. Within the following week, I reached out to Margaret's bank to negotiate the mortgage payments and prevent the foreclosure. Margaret had missed 5 months of payments, which, along with late and pre-foreclosure fees, amounted to approximately $220,000. It was a significant sum, even from my savings, but it was necessary to prevent Margaret from losing her home. Her gratitude was palpable. She even prepared a lavish feast as a gesture of thanks, showcasing a humility I hadn't seen in her before. I reminded her, though, of the importance of beginning her job hunt promptly, a process she assured me had already commenced. Moving in with Margaret marked a new chapter. Living together again was an interesting adjustment. Margaret had become more particular about the cleanliness of the house than I remembered, a trait I didn't mind except when it came to my personal space. I stood my ground regarding the state of my room, advocating for mutual respect for our individual preferences. especially since my financial contribution was a significant reason we were able to maintain this living arrangement. Despite occasional minor disagreements, cohabitation was largely positive. As time passed, transitioning from weeks to months and months into years, my patience began to wear thin with Margaret's prolonged job search. She consistently assured me she was looking for employment, yet progress seemed stagnant. Despite my support, I noticed no progress in Margaret's job search. It struck me as odd that she hadn't even mentioned going for an interview. When I gently broached the subject, she quickly became defensive. I explained that my concern wasn't with her efforts, but with the lack of tangible results, especially since a year had passed since she promised to find a job. I suggested even part-time work as a temporary solution, but she dismissed the idea, suggesting she'd rather face homelessness than accept a job she deemed beneath her. This response, especially her using my dad's memory to guilt me, felt manipulative. I continued to cover the mortgage, but Margaret's behavior grew increasingly difficult to handle. She started questioning my whereabouts and who I spent time with, imposing more than I felt was fair. Initially, I tolerated her behavior, but as it escalated, I asserted my boundaries, which led to tension between us. After another 2 years passed with no change, my patience wore thin, doubting Margaret's sincerity in finding employment. I took the controversial step of looking through her emails. What I found confirmed my suspicions. She had applied to only 2 jobs in the 3 years since I started helping with the mortgage. I felt betrayed by her deceit, especially after I had gone to great lengths to support her. Confronting Margaret about my discovery and the decision to stop financial assistance led to a heated argument. She reacted poorly, failing to understand the gravity of her actions and my frustration. This moment was a turning point, forcing me to reassess our living situation and the sustainability of our current arrangement. For 3 years, I extended every possible support to Margaret, offering guidance and patience as she navigated her challenges. However, her reluctance to accept advice or actively seek employment led me to confront her about her apparent lack of effort. When I asked her to prove her job search efforts, she accused me of invading her privacy. Despite this, I expressed how our relationship had grown in my gratitude for the opportunity to help her. But I also emphasized my need to focus on my own future goals, which did not include indefinitely paying for a home that was never in my plans. Margaret's distress was palpable, and though it affected me, I needed space to process my frustration. During this time, I considered how I could assist Margaret in a way that would also allow me to move forward. After some research, I suggested she consider filing for bankruptcy as a way to manage her mortgage payments and potentially relieve her financial burden for up to 6 years. Initially hesitant, Margaret eventually opened up to the idea, and I committed to helping her with the process. It took weeks, but we successfully navigated the paperwork, and Margaret was granted a reprieve from her mortgage payments. With this newfound relief, I urged Margaret to focus on rebuilding her life. Her response, though cold, indicated she believed she could manage on her own. This realization that our relationship had shifted from mutual support to dependency prompted me to make a significant change. I moved out the following month, focusing on my personal and professional growth. As time passed, the distance between Margaret and me grew. We barely communicated, and it became clear that the effort to maintain our connection was one-sided. This chapter of my life, while challenging, taught me the importance of setting boundaries and prioritizing my well-being alongside my willingness to help others. Despite everything, I made an effort to check in on Margaret from time to time because she was important to my dad, and he loved her deeply. Whenever I inquired about her well-being or if she had found work, she responded dismissively, telling me it was none of my business. Her coldness stung, but over time. I learned to let it slide, focusing instead on the positive trajectory of my own life. However, about 6 months after Margaret's bankruptcy relief ended, she unexpectedly appeared at my doorstep, looking visibly distressed. Her disheveled appearance and evident weight loss signaled she was facing severe hardships. Despite anticipating a request for help and mentally preparing to refuse, I couldn't ignore her plight and invited her in to talk. Margaret confessed to spiraling into deep loneliness and depression after I moved out, expressing regret for pushing me away during her moments of anger. She explained her anger was directed not only towards herself and the loneliness she felt, but also towards my dad for leaving her in such a state, and the frustration of her ongoing struggles, including a 5-year-long unsuccessful job hunt. Hearing Margaret's admission of her severe depression and financial desperation, including the dwindling of the funds my dad left her and her family's lack of support, left me in a difficult position. Though I had firmly decided against further financial assistance, the sight of someone so close to the edge of despair, someone my dad had cared for, made it challenging to maintain that resolve. I understood all too well how debilitating depression could be and found myself torn between my determination to uphold my boundaries and the empathy I felt for a person in the throes of such a profound struggle. My empathy quickly turned into action as I assured Margaret I would extend my help once more. Her tears and heartfelt thanks warmed me, reinforcing my belief in supporting those in need. The following week found me back at the bank, navigating the complexities of Margaret's mortgage, which had been neglected for 6 months. I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't considered adjusting her mortgage to more manageable payments. However, considering her overwhelmed state, I chalked it up to her inability to deal with the situation. Upon reviewing her mortgage details, I discovered she was $992,000 short of fully settling her debt, including late fees. My financial situation has improved significantly over the past 6 years, allowing me the capability to cover this amount. When I proposed directly paying off her mortgage with the understanding she would repay me over time, Margaret was moved to tears. She eagerly agreed, promising repayment. I planned to formalize this agreement in writing, but somehow Margaret persuaded me to prioritize settling her debt before drafting any contract. After paying off her loan, I visited her home only to be greeted by a scene that unsettled me deeply. An unknown car was in the driveway, and inside the sound of Margaret's laughter, intertwined with a man's voice, filled the air. Entering the living room, I was confronted with the sight of Margaret, comfortably seated on another man's lap, a stark contrast to the grief-stricken widow who had spoken so fondly of my father just a week prior. This display of affection, so soon after her declarations of undying love for my dad, and the emotional appeals that had led me to assist her financially, felt like a betrayal. Reflecting on her earlier words, I realized they might have been a calculated attempt to manipulate my feelings, leveraging my love for my dad to coax me into paying off her loan. The realization struck hard when Margaret, noticing my presence, pointed me out to her companion with a laugh, introducing me in a manner that felt dismissive and exploitative. This moment crystallized the manipulation I had overlooked, prompting me to reconsider the nature of my support and the boundaries I had allowed to be crossed. During an unexpected and unsettling visit, Margaret gloated to her companion about how she had cunningly manipulated me into paying off the house's mortgage, a property she acquired through my father. She admitted to feigning helplessness to secure my financial assistance, revealing her true colors and intentions. Her lack of genuine affection for my father and her exploitation of our relationship for financial gain was blatant. Stunned by her callousness and deceit, I confronted her, only to be met with a shocking lack of remorse. She proudly declared her victory, boasting about owning the house and her new life with her boyfriend, utterly dismissing the love my father had for her. Feeling betrayed and hurt, I left her house in tears, determined not to let her triumph in her deceit. Fortunately, I had a moment of providence. The bank had a policy of holding large transactions for a day, allowing me the chance to cancel the transfer upon realizing Margaret's deceit. I promptly canceled the payment, cutting off all contact with her, ensuring she could not reach me again. As days turned into weeks, Margaret remained oblivious to the canceled transaction, living under the false assumption that she had secured the house. Meanwhile, I moved on, both physically and emotionally, taking solace in the knowledge that her treachery would soon come to light. True to expectations, the mortgage payment was never completed, leading to the foreclosure of the house. Word of her situation spread among mutual friends, revealing her true nature to all, and isolating her further as her boyfriend left, and she found herself without support, income, or a roof over her head. This painful experience taught me the harsh reality of human nature and the importance of guarding my emotions against manipulation. I learned the hard lesson that not everyone deserves my trust or my help, especially those who see kindness as a weakness to be exploited. In spite of the turmoil, I found strength in my ability to protect my father's legacy and stand up for myself. This ordeal, while bitter, has not embittered me. Instead, it has empowered me to live a life that honors my father's memory, free from the shadows of the past. My name is Lisa, and I am 37 years old. I live with my husband, Larry. We both work for the company that my father-in-law founded. Even though my father-in-law has retired, he built a small construction company into a business that makes $300 billion a year. He bought other construction companies, and while he was sometimes tough, everyone admires his great business skills. Larry, who was chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised as a pampered child and has a gentle character. I worry that he isn't strong enough for the tough business world. While being gentle might sound good, in reality, he is very indecisive. He has even admitted, "I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way." He shows no real intention of seriously taking over the company. We've been married for 10 years, and lately I'm frustrated with his lack of initiative. In contrast to Larry, I consider myself to be quite decisive. It seems my father-in-law, during his active years, appreciated this about me and gave me various tasks to do. Before marrying Larry, I worked at a bank, so I am used to managing finances and always think about the numbers. When I got married, I quit my job at the bank and planned to become a full-time homemaker. However, my father-in-law asked me to work for the construction company instead. Shortly after I started working, my father-in-law began inviting me to participate in board meetings and asked for my opinion on management matters. At first, the board members seemed skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in important meetings. But as I consistently provided useful insights, they started listening to my suggestions. Although Larry was also a board member, he rarely attended meetings and was exempted by the other board members and my father-in-law as normal. When I came home from a meeting one day, I found Larry casually watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked angrily. "You're a key member. You should take it seriously." Without showing any guilt, he replied, "Even if I go, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wonder if he was upset by my involvement in board meetings. Though he made such remarks, my father-in-law has been teaching me the details of running the business and seems to be grooming me as a successor. About 3 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. When there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me, while Larry was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would push Larry to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he'd disappear somewhere by noon and just stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seeming indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was given duties similar to a CEO's. Given that we're a large company with many employees, I've been committed to increasing sales and profit for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband Larry seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversation between us at home had lessened, and our relationship began to become tense. "I ran into your sister Nancy today, and we had lunch together," Larry said when he came home. My sister Nancy is 3 years older than me and had just divorced about 4 months ago. The cause of her divorce was infidelity on her part, which led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed into our parents' home. My husband Larry went to my parents' house to calm down Nancy's husband in my place, since I was busy with work. Larry, who had a gentle upbringing and a calming personality, managed to convince Nancy's raging husband to leave for the time being. Later, Nancy told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised Larry. Nancy's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by Larry's calm and easygoing demeanor. Nancy was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony. But since this incident, she seemed to look at Larry differently. Until then, she seemed to have thought of Larry, who is not particularly attractive and is indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. But after the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Nancy, now single after her divorce, probably saw Larry as a great catch, as she always loved wealthy men. But I, who was engrossed in work, could not imagine such a thing. Of course, my sister wouldn't have known that Larry is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Nancy's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company and bragged to me at their wedding. My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you? Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 5 months after hearing from Larry that he had lunch with Nancy, I returned home to find Larry unusually serious. "Lisa, I have something to discuss," he said. It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad feeling. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Nancy is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce," he said. I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Nancy was pregnant. At a loss for words, Larry continued, "Nancy is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you." I was stunned. I asked him, "So you want to marry my sister?" With a troubled look, Larry responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at Larry's typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband, and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business. but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled that her son had a child. But she quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. For my mother-in-law, she seemed to be more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Lisa, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about Larry. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do what he likes." It seemed that my father-in-law valued the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he has retired, my father-in-law, as the founder, still has a strong voice in the company, and most of the company's shares are held by him, so there are no executives who go against his will. I was also getting interested in my work and was reluctant to give up. Now that my job was settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile and said, "Lisa, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately," she said with a triumphant air. My husband was just silently listening to our conversation without saying anything. Despite being the one who caused the problem, I was appalled at my husband's indifferent face and said, "It's okay to get divorced, but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. So let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly." "I never thought you, my sister, would fall for a man like Larry," I retorted to my sister with irony. My sister glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized that it's not about looks and men. It's about what's inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk as if she fully understood my husband's inner self. Holding back my laughter, I said, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with Larry." The inner self my sister was talking about might be money. She seemed to think my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company. Though I only took out the necessary items, knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and alimony claims. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and the division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still there, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience," my sister said. Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister in addition to my husband. My sister is still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as I wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, "This mansion is originally Larry's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right?" The lawyer answered my sister calmly, "This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide." It seemed like even my husband thought this house belonged to his father. "Is that so?" "I thought this house was Dad's," he said casually. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and confronted the lawyer. "Wait a minute. So does that mean I can't live in this house?" The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner. "Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it." At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Oh, you should have said that earlier." "It'll be fine since Larry, the president, will be living here," my sister said. The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. "What are you talking about? Lisa is the president, not Larry. I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, "Larry is merely an advisor without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, and I was also made president." Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director and president. The other executives appreciated my performance, and there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights. It's more of a pity than being a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So I was bearing all the living expenses. My husband, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even care whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. Though I thought of it as a normal rental property, the lawyer, still laughing, asked me, "Can we continue to rent this house to Larry?" My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. "What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from Larry? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free," my sister said. The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was her husband Larry, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. "Guess a house this big does have a high rent." "I can't afford that with my salary," he said. His executive compensation would barely leave any money behind if he had to pay that rent. Their living expenses would be hard to cover. During the 6 years of our marriage, Larry had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared due to high rent and living expenses. There were hardly any assets left, and splitting the savings was the only way for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, who now knew that the mansion she had been hoping for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. Larry was grinning as usual. I suggested, "Why don't you move out and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news." Larry agreed, but I couldn't help laughing inside at why I had to consider this man who was about to be my ex. I started worrying if this unreliable man could raise a child, but then I decided it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, "Are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seemed pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. "Alimony? I have to pay for it too?" she asked, astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the discussion earlier. "You said, 'I'll give plenty of alimony money,' but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right?" "My salary is really low," she continued. Larry and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents. It didn't matter to me, but seeing Larry and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for a grandchild, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for Larry, and it was paid in full. But my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, "Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well?" To this, my father-in-law responded, "I have no reason to be called Dad by you." He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried my ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." As I watched all this unfold, I reflected on how things had gotten to this point. When Larry first agreed to go back to his parents' house, I knew it was for the best. His mother was thrilled about the baby, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Larry was completely unprepared for the responsibilities of parenthood. His indifferent attitude throughout our marriage hadn't changed, and I doubted it ever would. Seeing my sister's shock when she realized she had to pay alimony was almost comical. She had been so confident, but she clearly hadn't thought things through. Her financial situation was already strained, and adding more payments would only make it worse. I wondered how she could be so naive. The negotiations for alimony and the division of property were surprisingly straightforward. My lawyer was thorough and ensured that everything was handled fairly. Larry and my sister, however, seemed lost and overwhelmed by the process. They exchanged glances of surprise and confusion, making it clear that they hadn't fully grasped the reality of their situation. Moving out of the house was a significant step for me. I had already found a new apartment and made arrangements to start fresh. The house, which I had once thought of as a home, now felt like a burden lifted off my shoulders. It was company property anyway, so leaving it behind felt like shedding the last remnants of my life with Larry. After I moved out, the tension between my sister and my in-laws only grew. The lie about her being pregnant with my ex-husband's child had caused a rift that couldn't be mended. My father-in-law, who had never approved of my sister, was especially vocal in his disapproval. He had always seen her as someone who had disrupted our family, and this latest deception only confirmed his worst fears. My sister's plea for my father-in-law to pay alimony was met with cold rejection. "I have no reason to be called Dad by you," he said, his anger evident. Her dreams of a carefree life supported by my ex-husband's family crumbled, and she found herself without the support she had expected. This journey has taught me a lot about resilience and the importance of staying true to oneself despite the personal challenges I faced. I've managed to keep the company on a steady path and even achieve growth. It's not always easy, but knowing that I'm making a positive impact on people's lives keeps me going. In the end, my focus remains on leading the company and supporting my team. I'm determined to build a successful future for all of us. While my personal life has had its ups and downs, my professional life gives me stability and a sense of accomplishment. This is where I find my strength and motivation, and it's where I choose to direct my energy for the foreseeable future. I'm done with you. You were stealing $1,500 every month from the money I was giving you, weren't you? When I got home from work, my husband John suddenly started yelling at me. I was confused and didn't understand what was going on. When John, his face turning red, kept going off, I just got a call from Kevin. He said you didn't give them any money as a baby gift, and you didn't even send them the money I promised to support them every month. Have you been misusing the money I gave you all this time? Of course, I had been sending money to my son and his wife every month, and just today I gave them a sum of money as a baby gift. Why would they say they hadn't received anything? I did give it to them. Don't lie. No matter how much I denied it, John wouldn't listen to me. Listen, I'm not giving you any more money for living expenses, but if you bring the gift money to Kevin properly, I'll forgive you. If not, I'll divorce you. Fine, let's divorce then. Ignoring John's surprise, I left the house. Up until now, I had been desperately working part-time to support my struggling family finances. Despite managing both living expenses and sending money to my son and his wife, being treated like a thief was more than I could bear. I couldn't do it anymore with John, who just blamed without listening, and I decided to cut ties with my son and his wife, who easily lied and made me out to be the villain. With that decision, I left our home. My name is Mary. I'm 52 years old. I work part-time at a grocery store. I got married at the age of 22 and had a child right away. John works in sales at a beverage company and is often home late, so all the housework and childcare were my responsibilities. While my friends around me were enjoying their free time, all I had to do was raise my child and do housework. There were days when I felt beaten down. However, I desperately worked hard to do housework and raise my child because I chose this path for myself. My son Kevin moved out when he went to college out of state. Although he found a job in state, he started living on his own, which allowed me some leisure time. While I was living such a life, Kevin told me he had a girlfriend he wanted to marry. He's that mature now. I was deeply emotional and arranged to meet them at our home. On the day of the meeting, the woman he brought home was named Ava. She was very cheerful and laughed a lot. Kevin was smiling the whole time too. I was really happy that Kevin seemed to have found a wonderful partner. Both John and I wholeheartedly congratulated Kevin on his getting married, and things moved quickly. They got engaged and married 6 months after their marriage. John and I were relaxing at home one weekend when our son and his wife came to visit. Dad, I have a favor to ask. Could I ask you to send me some money every month?" "What's happening all of a sudden?" The couple looked embarrassed as they spoke, and both John and I were taken aback. "The thing is, we're thinking of starting infertility treatments, but we don't have enough money." "Infertility treatments? Is that necessary?" "A lot of couples do it these days. We're hoping to have kids soon." I could understand how they felt, but they had been married for only 6 months. It seemed a bit too soon. People have children in their mid-30s nowadays, and Ava is only 30, so I don't think there's any need to worry so much. "What if we can't have kids later? You had a kid early, so you can't understand how I feel to be 30 years old with no kids yet." Ava suddenly raised her voice loudly, surprising us because we didn't expect to be yelled at. Kevin also spoke up at Ava's words. "Mom, she's right. You don't understand Ava's feelings at all. We're anxious. That's why we want to start fertility treatments as soon as possible. Dad, you understand, right? You want to see your grandchildren soon, don't you?" "I suppose so." "All right, we'll support you as much as we can." "Thank you." John agreed with the words of Kevin. If John was fine with it, it wasn't a matter of me. Just as I was thinking this, John said something shocking. "Then give Kevin $1,500 from our living expenses every month." "What, from the living expenses? That's impossible." John gave me $1,000 a month from that. I had to pay the mortgage, John's car loan, and our living expenses. There's no way we could afford an additional $1,500 for their support. However, John glared at me sharply. "What? Haven't you been saving any surplus from the living expenses? Don't tell me you've used it all up." "That's not it, but there's no way we can afford it with the loan repayments. No surplus. Managing our finances is your job. You're really useless. It's all your wasteful spending that's making us short on money. I won't pay any more than this." John wouldn't listen at all and went back to his room. I couldn't believe it. It was hard to save even $1,000 a month. And then we had to send money from our savings. But once John started talking, he didn't listen to anyone at all. I was stunned, but my son and his wife glanced at me and stood up. "Then, Mom, please take care of it," they said with a smirk. The two of them left the house. Even if they asked me to take care of it, there was nothing I could do. I started working part-time at the local grocery store. Every day was a struggle with the new job, but I was desperate to manage both living expenses and the support for my son and his wife. And finally, by adding my own earnings, I managed to cover both living and support costs. Yet, as Joan regularly went out for drinks, claiming it was for networking, and returned home late, my stress built up. Life would be so much easier with that money. Saying so only led to a fight. I had no choice but to persevere without relying on John. 6 months later, I unexpectedly ran into Kevin's childhood friend, Samantha, at work. "Mary, long time no see." "Oh, Samantha, how have you been?" As we exchanged greetings, Samantha smiled kindly. "By the way, Kevin's doing really well. Did he get a job at a great company?" "Kevin, he's working for a local company. Just a regular guy, really. I thought he was making good money since he's been on a lot of vacations abroad lately." "Vacations abroad?" I looked puzzled, and Samantha pulled out her phone. "Yeah, you can see here." I was so jealous of all the pictures he had been posting on social media. Samantha showed me many photos that looked like they were taken at a luxury resort hotel abroad. The buildings and scenery around them in the photos were clearly not those of the States. There were many more photos on the site, and it looked like they had been to several countries in the past few months. There was no way they had the money to travel abroad, since they were saying they were short of money because of fertility treatments. Determined to find out the truth, I headed to my son and his wife's home. "This social media account is yours, right? Why have you been traveling abroad? Where did the money come from?" My son and his wife looked at each other uncomfortably. "We just got lucky. We entered a sweepstake. Never thought we'd actually win." Yes, Ava is just really lucky." "Really? Isn't it strange to win so often?" "Not at all. It's really just luck." My son and his wife were clearly flustered. I couldn't help but think, are they just fooling around with the monthly support money? "I see. How's the fertility treatment going?" "Oh, it's going well. Of course, we really appreciate the help." "Which clinic are you going to?" It's the fertility clinic a little farther away, right?" When I asked about the treatment, they fumbled and didn't provide any details. Normally, insurance would have covered some level of infertility treatment. Yet, do they really need $1,500 every month for that? I can't imagine what kind of treatments would cost that much. My doubts about my son and his wife only deepened. About a year later, my son and his wife finally had their first child. It was a beautiful baby girl, and both John and I were thrilled. However, John was too busy with work to visit the hospital, so I went to visit them alone and gave them a gift on the birth of their baby girl. I had to think about what we were giving them all by myself, and after much thought, I decided to give them a gift card. Considering the expenses they would face, a gift card would be practical. At the hospital, my son happily held the baby. "Kevin, Ava, congratulations. Here's a little baby gift for all of you." "Thank you. Is this a gift card?" "That really helps. How much is it for?" "It's $3,000. You can use some of it for your baby." $3,000. When I mentioned the amount, their faces fell. "Is something wrong?" "No, it's nothing." The sudden coldness in my son and his wife's attitude was puzzling, but I had to head to my part-time job now. I wondered if I had somehow offended them as I left, feeling uneasy. When I got home, surprisingly, John was already there, and he started yelling right away. "Hey, I thought you went to see the baby today and gave them a baby gift." "Yes, I did." "Don't lie." I couldn't understand why John was so furious, and as he continued, his face turned red with anger. "I just got a call from Kevin." I heard that you didn't give him a baby gift, and you didn't send him money every month as well. You've been doing whatever you wanted with the money I've been giving you. What are you talking about? I gave the gift and sent money to them. I'm disappointed in you, stealing our son's money. He was crying that they felt uncertainty because they couldn't get the fertility treatments. Aren't you ashamed as a parent? You know what? I did send the money. No matter what I said, John wouldn't believe me and just sighed. Listen, I'm not giving you any more money for living expenses, but if you bring the gift money to Kevin properly, I'll forgive you from your own hard-earned money. You understand? John's words cooled my head instantly. Why does he only believe Kevin's side of the story? He was convinced that he was right, talking down to me. I was fed up with John's arrogance, and I wanted nothing to do with my son and his wife, who so easily lied and tried to belittle me. I stood up resolute. Understood. I'll leave. What? You're leaving? Yes, I don't need your forgiveness. John was trembling as he spoke. Do you even know what you're saying? I might as well divorce you. Okay, let's divorce then. Grateful that John was willing to grant a divorce, I left the house 2 weeks after moving out. John was calling me every few minutes after work. I was about to block his number when he called again, and I accidentally pressed the answer button. Hello, do you need something? Please communicate through a lawyer about the divorce. Wait, it's not about that, Mary. Please, let's have a talk. What are we talking about? I don't want to. As I was about to hang up, fearing that things would get complicated, John, sounding frantic, spoke from the other end. Listen, I just got all these bills today for gas and other things, and I can't pay them. I didn't expect them to be so high. Is that so? That's tough. Don't be so cold. You wouldn't think just gas, electricity, and water could cost over $300, would you? I've already spent all my salary and savings this month. I was speechless, appalled. Utility bills over $300 were not very unusual. It was a good-sized house there, and if he lived without thinking anything, it was only natural that it would exceed that much. Besides, he was the kind of person who would leave the water running when I told him to save it. The bills were bound to keep increasing. I didn't expect it this expensive, he said. I said it was a rip-off at work, and everyone laughed, saying it was normal. And I still have to make loan repayments. How have you managed all this time? That's why I was working. I was the one covering the shortfall. You were doing that for me? I had told Jan about my part-time job, but he probably thought I was just earning money for my own spending. If only you had told me. I did tell you. You just wouldn't listen. I don't want anything to do with you anymore, so stop contacting me. I tried to hang up, not wanting to hear John's voice any longer, but he desperately tried to keep me on the line. Wait, I'll listen this time. I want to meet and talk face to face. Can we talk at home? No, thank you. Don't say that. I am sorry. I should have listened more to what you had to say, and about Kevin's baby gift, too. I want to talk with you and them together. No, I'm fine. I'm too tired to go all the way to your house after work, I said, relaxing my tired shoulders. I went out through the employee exit, thinking I'd had enough and wanted to go home. But to my surprise, John was standing there. I thought you'd say that, so I came to pick you up from work, John said. I sighed at John's words. Now that he's here, I couldn't refuse to go home with him. I steeled myself and got into the car. When we arrived, my son and his wife were there, looking solemn. Hey, Mom, long time no see, Kevin greeted. I ignored Kevin's greeting and sat down. So what's this meeting about? I'd like to get back home soon. Don't be like that. I wanted to talk about the support money for Kevin and Ava. Mary, you said you sent it, right? Yes, I definitely sent it, I replied. At that, my son and his wife raised their voices. No, that's a lie. We really haven't received anything. Can you still say that after seeing this? I took out copies of the bank statement from my bag and showed them. It was firmly stated there that the money was wired to Kevin's account. Oh no, Kevin began. Ignoring Kevin's stammering, I took an envelope out of my bag. Inside, there was a detailed record of my son and his wife's activities over the past 6 months. Kevin and Ava, you guys have been on numerous vacations abroad, right? And you didn't get any fertility treatments at all, did you? Just wanted money to have fun anyway. What is this? Kevin's face paled. Here's an investigative report from the detective agency. You have traveled abroad 4 times in the last 6 months. Across from them, John's face was turning red. You deceived me. Shame on you for deceiving your own parents. Give us back the baby gift we gave you. We don't have that money anymore. We had no choice. We were short on cash, Kevin admitted. Realizing there was no excuse for their actions, Kevin began to talk back. We just overspent and were struggling with the repayments. And yet, the baby gift was only $3,000. I thought I could get a little more if I pretended that Mom didn't give it to me because it wasn't enough. I can't believe you would even lie to get money from us. I will not have anything to do with you guys from now on. Don't contact me at all. It's just a little lie. It's not a big deal among family. I was stunned by Kevin's justification. Did they not know that if he lied and got money from us, even if we were his family, it would be an act of fraud? We're facing tough times ahead. We want to build a house. We are family, so you should forgive this much. No way, you are disowned, I declared. Wait, please. It's true that Kevin did something wrong. I'll talk sternly to him. Please forgive us. Ava spoke up, to which Kevin turned on her. Why is it all my fault? It was your idea in the first place. Don't make things up. You were the one who said if we say we need money for fertility treatments, they'll give it to us, Kevin argued. As they began to argue, John clenched his fists in anger. Enough. Both of you are to blame. Never come to see us. John was visibly furious, his legs shaking with irritation. They must have been expecting to continue receiving financial support. The son and his wife had to look down silently and disappointedly. I was wrong. I should have believed you. I apologize. Can we start over? John then turned to me and apologized. I had never received an apology from John throughout our marriage. Perhaps the old me would have forgiven him just for the apology, but now my love for John was gone. No amount of apologies would change my mind. I've already filed for divorce, so we're strangers now. Don't say that. It's been hard managing the household chores since you left. Look at this mess. Isn't it terrible? Indeed, the kitchen was littered with trash, plastic bottles scattered on the floor, drugstore bags strewn everywhere. A stark contrast to how it was when I was around. And you want to drag me back to take care of the house. I'm not a maid. Of course not, but I can't manage without you, Mary. All I could do was sigh at John for being so selfish. It seems I had always been just a convenient housekeeper to him. I can live without you. In fact, I can manage better on my own, I said confidently. But if you're only working part-time, the income isn't that great, right? You might struggle, he replied, concerned. Living alone is far easier, actually. I don't need to pay rent since I live in my parents' home. Unfortunately, there's no benefit for me to continue living with you. So I'm leaving, I explained, making my stance clear as I stood up. John grabbed my arm. Wait, I'm really in a tough spot. The gas and water have been shut off. I can't make it on my own. Why are you out of money? What did you spend it on since you left? I thought $500 was enough for living expenses, so I spent the rest on horse racing. John admitted, hanging his head in shame. I was utterly dismayed. This was the result of doing whatever he wanted, because he thought he would be able to save money on food and other living expenses with me gone. I have no obligation to help him. If it's really that tough, why don't you ask your own son for help? I suggested, feeling that it was pointless to stay involved with these people. I left the house while they were still arguing, blocking their calls and cutting ties completely. Later, I heard that John, having had his utilities cut off and unable to manage on his own, moved in with Kevin's family. He must have realized that he could not live on his own after all. Even though he had made so much fuss about disowning his son, he now relied on him for financial support. But it was too late. I was glad I divorced him before his gambling addiction worsened. Life is still long, and I want to enjoy it to the fullest. I've got a family now, so I'm getting a divorce. Take the kid and get out. Oh, and just so you know, I won't pay a dime in compensation. Next to Greg, Susan was nodding in agreement. Their attitudes seemed to suggest that I was the one who was mistaken. Only the babies and the strollers, unaware of anything, slept peacefully. Greg didn't help at all. When Emma was born, he spent his days playing around. Eventually, he even started dipping into Emma's school funds, despite never fulfilling his duties as a father. Greg got to enjoy himself and start a new family. Did he ever consider how Emma and I felt? As various thoughts raced through my mind and left me unable to speak, Emma pointed to the TV that had been left on and said, aren't you watching TV, Dad?" At her words, Greg ended up yelling loudly, "My name is Jennifer Hansen. I am a housewife in my 50s. I live with my husband, Greg, and my daughter, Emma. I met Greg after graduating from college at the company, where we both started working as fresh graduates. Is there something stuck? If you don't understand something, don't hesitate to ask. I was actually assigned a different senior with more experience as my mentor. However, seeing me tense and unable to speak, well, it was Greg who approached me. Greg patiently explained the things I was stuck on, and from then on, I naturally began to ask him about various things. As time went by, we quickly grew closer. Eventually, Greg confessed his feelings to me. "I fell for your dedication to your work. Would you like to date me?" I'd love to, since I had feelings for Greg as well. We started dating and quickly got married. A few years later, we were blessed with Emma. However, it wasn't always fun and games. In fact, it would be no exaggeration to say that there were many painful days. The cause was Greg's infidelity. It was around the time I got pregnant with Emma. Until then, Greg had cherished me deeply. When he learned of my pregnancy, he even teared up and said, "Thank you." I had severe morning sickness, and the smell of food alone made me nauseous. After the wedding, upon Greg's insistence, I had quit my job. Greg was up for a promotion at the time, so I accepted his request. As a full-time housewife, I was in charge of all the household chores. Being at home, I felt it was only natural to do so. But cooking in such a poor physical condition was indeed painful. Hey, I'm sorry to ask, but could we eat out or buy ready-made meals for a while? It was difficult to say that as someone tasked with the household duties, but I gathered the courage and approached Greg, who was relaxing in the living room. Greg frowned for a moment and asked in a serious tone, "Why? You're a housewife, aren't you? You're not working, so you have to do the household chores properly. Otherwise, you're just a leech." Indeed, what Greg said was true. After all, I was living on Greg's money. It was only fair to expect me to do the household chores in return. But I couldn't do what I couldn't do, and it wasn't that I was being lazy. Desperately, I tried to convey my feelings to Greg. I feel nauseous from the morning sickness. Just smelling food makes me want to throw up. Really, it's hard to do any household chores when my belly is so heavy and uncomfortable. Shut up. That's just an excuse. You're a housewife, so do your household chores properly. How will you take care of me if you keep up with such a diet? It's your job to think about nutritional balance and prepare meals full of love to welcome your husband. Overwhelmed by his harsh words, I felt dizzy on the spot. I wasn't asking for his help every day, but Greg could have helped a bit with the chores on his days off, just like he relaxed in the living room. No matter how desperately I tried to convey my feelings, Greg wouldn't listen. So, enduring my heavy belly and nausea, I managed to get the household chores done. It was a continuous struggle, but still, when Emma was born, I felt as if those painful days were finally over. At the same time, I was moved by the sight of Emma crying in the delivery room. Greg, saying he had work, didn't come to the hospital or even respond to my calls. Seeing his behavior, the nurses also seemed somewhat uncomfortable. But while holding Emma, I could forget all the unpleasantness. I decided from the bottom of my heart to protect this child. For the rest of my life, I would make sure she lived without hardship, no matter what. As expected, Greg didn't participate in parenting at all. To ensure I had enough funds to raise Emma, I put her in daycare and started working from home. Of course, I had discussed this with Greg. What kind of job can an old lady with no skills do from home? It's almost like playing. It won't earn much, but do whatever you like. Without even listening to what the job entailed, Greg mocked me. Honestly, it was frustrating. But now I just use that feeling as motivation to work hard. Daddy, play with me. Greg was just relaxing in the living room as usual on his days off, and Emma sometimes called out to him. If it were me, I would have smiled and played with her right away. But Greg looked annoyed and shooed her away. Daddy is busy. I don't have time to play with you. Ask Mom to play. Saying that, he quickly got ready and left. Lately, I had noticed that Greg's outings had increased. Not just on weekends, but even on weekdays, he seemed to come home later. I checked the salary details, but there was no sign of overtime. Having worked there myself, I knew the company didn't demand excessive unpaid overtime. Could it be an affair? That thought crossed my mind, and I immediately hired a detective. It turned out that Greg was indeed involved in an affair with another woman. Greg, Emma is here too. What are you thinking? This is unacceptable for a father. Let's get a divorce. Filled with anger, I thrust the divorce papers at him. However, trying to appease me, Greg said, "Divorce is the only thing." And what about Emma? If she grows up without a father from such a young age, it could affect her personality. Honestly, I was worried about that. If we divorced now, Emma would end up being raised by a single parent. Even if it didn't affect her personality, she could be teased at school. But that didn't calm my anger. It seemed we would definitely end up divorcing. However, something made me reconsider the divorce. It was Emma sleep-talking, "Daddy, let's play," while breathing softly in her sleep. Emma murmured this in a small voice. Since Greg's affair had been discovered, there had been a tense atmosphere in the house. Emma must have sensed it somehow. Even so, this child was still seeking her father. Overwhelmed by her bravery, I felt tears fall and was disgusted with myself for nearly taking her father away from her in my anger. I decided that when Emma no longer needed a father, that would be the time for divorce. I resolved to demand a higher than usual compensation from the affair partner and set a condition for Greg to spend time with Emma once a week, and decided not to divorce. It turned out that Greg had covered the affair partner's compensation payment, But that didn't matter to me as long as both were hit hard. That was enough. After that, Greg did indeed spend time with Emma once a week as promised. However, it didn't last long. I felt like complaining that this wasn't what we had agreed upon, but since our relationship had been repaired and we were no longer fighting daily, I couldn't bear to dredge up the past and make Emma suffer again. Time just passed, and we entered our 50s. Emma, who we had cherished so much, had turned 20, found a job, and was living on her own. Greg had been on a solo assignment overseas for the past 3 years, so I ended up spending time alone at home. Concerned about me, Emma had been living at home even after getting a job. Since his solo assignment, Greg rarely showed his face at home. Gradually, Greg's presence faded from our lives. That day was Emma's day off from work, and we were leisurely spending time watching TV and eating snacks. Then the doorbell rang. Yes, when I checked, there stood Greg and a young blonde woman holding a stroller. At a glance, she seemed about Emma's age. Twin babies were sleeping soundly in the stroller. Not understanding what was going on just from the video, I hesitantly opened the front door to let them in. Nice to meet you, ma'am. I'm Susan Holmes. I've been seeing Greg. Her words stunned me. This man had betrayed his family, not just once but twice, and this time with someone as young as his daughter. The fact that a man in his 50s was doting on such a young partner was unbelievable to the point of making me nauseous. Seeing me speechless, Greg probably felt the shock and said with a shallow smile, "I've got a family now, so I'm getting a divorce. Take the kid and get out. Oh, and just so you know, I won't pay a dime in compensation." Oh, Greg, that's terrible. Greg and Susan both looked at me, unable to say anything, and seemed to be almost laughing at me. Only the sleeping babies in the stroller were oblivious, breathing peacefully. Their behavior reminded me of Emma's sleep talking from that time. However, as I was silently watching Emma suddenly pointed at the TV. "Huh, Dad, aren't you watching the TV?" At her words, everyone's gaze turned to the TV. The screen displayed a news headline, "Today's Hot Topic." The female CEO with rumored annual sales of $500 million. The camera switched to the interviewee. Seeing it, Greg suddenly shouted, "What does this mean? Why are you on the TV?" Yes, the female CEO being interviewed was me. After Emma started daycare, I began working from home. At first, it was really just small jobs, but as work began to pick up, I founded a company to help others like me find good projects. It was uncertain at first, but there seemed to be a demand, and business grew significantly. 2 years ago, it became a listed company. Now it's considered a dream company for those in the same field, with constant job applications and project requests. Explaining this, Greg's face turned pale. Susan, who was momentarily flustered, quickly tried to cover for him. "But Greg, you're making money too, right? Maybe not $500 million, but you said you're a department head and might be promoted soon." Hearing this, I couldn't help but say what it seemed that Greg had been telling tall tales to impress Susan. He's just an ordinary employee, though. What indeed, there have been talks of Greg's promotion at the beginning of our marriage. However, that prospect had since disappeared because Greg had embezzled company funds. Even if it was a small amount, embezzlement is embezzlement. Greg, crying over the terrible mistake he had made, seemed palpable to me, and I repeatedly apologized to the CEO and repaid several times the amount embezzled with interest, of course. The money came from my savings, thanks to a certain connection with the CEO who took pity on my desperate pleas. It was agreed that Greg would continue to be employed on the condition that he would never be promoted, no matter what. I'm truly grateful to the CEO, but I also feel like I made unnecessary efforts. In the end, Greg could not get promoted, so of course there was no chance he could become a department head. Probably he lied to make himself look better to Susan. When I exposed this, Susan's face turned pale. "Why did you lie about that? You weren't a department manager, just an ordinary employee. That's unbelievable." "I wouldn't have done this if I had known." Susan screamed as if she was having a tantrum, tears in her eyes. Greg also pleaded, "I had no choice. I just wanted to catch your attention, Susan. I really loved you." Watching two grown adults in such a meltdown was quite unsightly. Amidst this chaos, Emma came from her room with an envelope and spread its contents on the table. Actually, I knew Dad was cheating. Everyone present, including myself, gasped in surprise at Emma's words. According to her, the trigger was when Greg, who was supposed to be on a business trip abroad, was spotted by one of her friends within the country. After confirming that the person in the photos was indeed Greg, Emma immediately hired a detective to start an investigation. She explained the situation to my parents and managed to cover the costs. She decided to monitor Greg's movements, focusing on the locations where he had been spotted. This led to a plethora of evidence of his infidelity. However, she didn't have the heart to report it to me. What if it shocked me too much? Moreover, the person Greg was cheating with was almost the same age as her. I must have thought it would cause me great emotional distress, so she decided to wait and see. Amidst all this, such an incident occurred. Documents and photos indicating Greg and Susan's affair were laid out densely on the table. Seeing this, both of them turned red, but Emma continued to speak honestly. "What Dad has done is despicable. Betraying Mom and secretly starting a family elsewhere is absolutely unforgivable. I barely have any memories of staying with him, but now I'm thoroughly disappointed." Emma must be feeling indescribable disgust. I too felt it was a waste to spend any more time on these people. I just wanted to settle things quickly. But for that, they needed to face some consequences. Of course, I plan to demand compensation, and on top of that, I'll have a word with the president. When I mentioned the president, Greg's face turned ashen. No wonder. The president refers to the head of the company where Greg works. If this matter comes to light, Greg, who has already caused trouble, will likely be fired this time. Wait, how can you even contact the president directly? You're just a former ordinary employee. You shouldn't have that kind of authority, Susan said. That normally, a mere former employee wouldn't be able to contact a company president directly. Why? I could do that has to do with my relationship with the president. My father and the president are childhood friends. At this, Greg and Susan both exclaimed in surprise. I had never told this to Greg. What do you mean? I've never heard about this. There's not much to it. My father has been friends with the president for a long time, which is why I was able to get a job at that company. Oh, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't a connection-based hiring, but it was also why I could do something when Greg embezzled funds. Though it was all in vain, I wonder what the president will think when he finds out how much his friend's daughter has been hurt. As I said this with exasperated calmness, Greg's face went from blue to pale white. That makes sense. If I speak to the president, Greg might be fired in no time. Already guilty of embezzlement, if he loses his current job, finding another one would likely be impossible. If that happens, he'll truly be lost since Susan alone probably couldn't support the twins and cover the entire family's living expenses. It would mean downfall for the whole family. What do you mean? I thought marrying you as a manager meant a secure future. If I thought I could live easily, what are you going to do about this now? Facing reality, Susan turned bright red and grabbed Greg by the collar. No surprise there, she thought it was a golden opportunity, but it turned out to be just a brard. While being shaken by Susan, Greg desperately tried to keep smiling. Of course, his face remained pale. But think about it. If we have love, we can overcome this, right? We have a family. We should pull together for a family. I believed we could do that with you, Susan. Such a poor attempt at persuasion, however. Such sweet talk won't sway Susan. To Susan, it seems there was no real interest in Greg himself, just in the wealth she thought he had. Chances of a young woman genuinely falling for a man in his 50s are slim. Unless he looked somewhat appealing, Greg, with a belly befitting his age and a greasy look, would not be someone I'd date, even if I were younger. I'll never forgive you, no marriage. Make sure you pay child support. These kids are yours after all. What, weren't you going to marry me? This isn't what we agreed on. At Susan's words, Greg pleaded tearfully. But then Emma interjected. But those kids, are they even, Dad? What do you mean? Confused by Emma's words. I tilted my head. Then Emma pulled something else out of the envelope. It seemed there was still some evidence she hadn't shown yet. Ah, stop. As Emma revealed the item, Susan screamed piercingly and threw herself across the table. At that moment, a photo fluttered down. In the photo, Susan was seen walking in a hotel district with an unknown man. You were seeing another man besides Greg. What? My words. Greg snatched the photo from my hands. Seeing it, Greg's face turned red, and he yelled at Susan. What is this about? You're betraying me too, weren't you? I was seriously in love with you, Susan, and yet you go messing around with other men. It's not like that. It's not like that, shut up. Those kids probably aren't even mine. I won't acknowledge them as mine until we do a DNA test. At Greg's words, Susan started sobbing bitterly. If he delays submitting the divorce papers, I'll sue you. That will make finding a job even harder, won't it? How sad. And with compensation to pay, are you sure you'll be all right? At my words, Greg gasped on the other side of the phone. To twist the knife further, I added, oh, and about the president, he seemed angrier than I thought. It looks like he's spreading the word about you everywhere. Isn't that nice? You're not a celebrity. No, please do something. If that happens, I'm finished. Greg's voice was colored with despair. It was so amusing that I couldn't help but smile. But all of this is Greg's fault. Greg, who has betrayed Emma and me for years. Marrying Greg was probably a mistake in the first place. Why did I ever marry such a person? I deeply regret being attracted to Greg in my younger days. I don't know what to tell you. You got this on yourself, right? I'm going to hang up now. I'll send you my lawyer's contact information later, so please communicate through them from now on. Goodbye. After Greg's plea, I hung up the phone. The ringtone sounded several more times, but I quickly blocked Greg's contact and sent only the lawyer information before blocking him. This way, Greg can no longer contact me. I decided to tell Emma to block his contact as well, feeling relieved that things were finally settled. What I heard from the lawyer later was that initially Greg hesitated to submit the divorce papers, but when he heard it might go to court, he submitted them quietly. However, the matter didn't end there. To pay the compensation to me, Greg borrowed a large sum of money from dubious sources. You might wonder why he would do that. But following this incident, his parents disowned him. Having already set things up with his friends, Greg had no one to turn to and ended up going to those people out of desperation. Though he managed to pay the compensation, he couldn't repay his debts and was eventually taken away by some shady characters. I heard through the grapevine that he's now working on a tuna fishing boat. I also demanded compensation from Susan. However, her parents ended up paying for it. I might have felt that it didn't impact her much, but her parents, furious about the incident, are now controlling all her income. Despite her youth, Susan cannot spend her salary freely, and her beauty is reportedly fading. Apparently, the babies from that time were not Greg's children after all. They are now being taken care of by Susan's parents. When I met them in the presence of a lawyer, they seemed like decent people, so I'm confident those twins will grow up just fine. I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Since then, I've been leisurely going about my work days. Actually, Emma works as an office clerk at my company. Although she is my daughter, I don't show her any favoritism, but she is quite a competent employee, beloved by everyone in the office. One day, Emma said to me, "I have something to tell you." Worried it might be some misconduct, my heart raced. But when I saw the young man standing next to her, my face softened. "I've decided to get married," saying that, Emma blushed. As a parent, I feel I've caused her a lot of trouble. I've surely made her go through a lot of hard times. Yet hearing my daughter's happiest news, tears started to fall. "Mom, you're getting ahead of yourself. That's for the wedding, right?" Emma took out a handkerchief and wiped my tears. Seeing me cry embarrassingly, the young man beside her smiled and said, "What a wonderful mother." There were many times I wanted to run away from all the hardships, but I could overcome them because I had Emma. I intend to continue being a mother she can be proud of. To think she would cheat and possibly even try to trick him into raising another man's child. Despite being the same age as Emma, it was almost impressive how cunning she could be with the evidence of infidelity. Demanding compensation won't be a problem. It's unlikely that Greg and Susan can repair their relationship now. Just when I thought everything was settled, Greg suddenly started to prostrate himself. "What are you trying to do?" I asked. Greg cried out desperately. "I've realized only Jennifer is right for me. I love only Jennifer. I might not have been a good husband before, but I'll do better this time. Please, let's try again. I can't do it without you, Jennifer." What does he mean he can't do it without me? If that were true, he wouldn't have gone after Susan. Hearing him say this now doesn't move me at all. Sorry, but I have no intention of withdrawing the divorce. Emma and I will leave this house. I'll send the divorce papers by mail, so please sign them and submit them. With that, I returned to my room. Emma seemed to understand what she needed to do as well, and went back to her own room. After spending some time preparing our belongings, Susan and the baby were gone, but Greg was sobbing alone in the living room. "Please reconsider. Don't leave me alone." Despite his pleas, we ignored him completely. Emma and I left the house together. For the time being, we decided to stay in a hotel. Once we find a house, we'll move there immediately. The divorce papers have been sent, and I've already consulted a lawyer. If there's any delay in the submission of the divorce papers, we can consult about that too. I felt as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Emma was attending work as usual. Initially, I had suggested that we look for separate places, but apparently, Emma thinks I'm too lonely, saying, "Let's live together in the new house." I'm relying on Emma as we look for a new house, work, and sometimes go out together without the troublesome presence of Greg. I have more enjoyable time with Emma. This time is the first since I got married that I can enjoy various things wholeheartedly and without any worries. However, such happy times won't last forever. It was a weekday, and I was at the office. After confirming the day's schedule with my secretary, I began to tackle the day's work on my computer. During work, my smartphone started ringing loudly. It was Greg, of course. Since it was work hours, I couldn't answer. I always tried to keep work and private life separate, so I ignored it, and eventually, it stopped. But then it started ringing again. Once it stopped, it started again. It was a continuous cycle, so annoying. Annoyed by the constant disturbance, I decided to answer the still ringing calls. After returning to the hotel, it seems that looking at the call history, he had been calling continuously since I first noticed. Before I could say hello, I heard Greg's desperate cries, "Help, the house. I'm going to lose the house." Hearing Greg's words, I honestly sighed. Is that all? That's only natural, isn't it? After all, that house isn't in your name. Yes, the ownership of the house we had lived in as a family was in my name. To be exact, it was in both Greg's and my name when we signed the contract. However, after Greg embezzled money and it became clear he wouldn't be promoted, we decided it would be difficult to continue mortgage payments. So we changed the title to my name. Thus, I have been the one paying for the mortgage alone since Greg contributed only a tiny amount. It was only natural to evict him if I no longer lived there. It's obvious, yet he didn't even realize that. It seems I have been too lenient with Greg for too long. If I had expressed my intentions more clearly, would the future have been different? After hearing my words, Greg seemed to recall those events and clung desperately. But it was pathetic. Do something. The president even announced I'm fired. If this continues, I'll lose not just my job, but my home too. How am I supposed to live? That's none of my concern. Why don't you figure it out yourself? This situation is entirely the result of Greg's own doing. If he hadn't betrayed our family, we could have continued living together even if we weren't close. That he couldn't is entirely Greg's fault, yet he refuses to accept his sins and clings disgracefully. How can he continue to show such an appalling side of himself? Even though he shows such a state, I won't sympathize. For me, the relationship with Greg is over. Honestly, I'm so averse to dealing with him that I decide to end it clearly.